Konnichiwa and welcome to episode 15 of the Leadership Japan podcast, and I am your host in Tokyo, Dr. Greg Story, President of Dale Carnegie Training Japan, and much more importantly, you are a student of leadership, highly motivated to be the best in your business field. And today we have an interview with Nick Jones from the In Touch magazine of the Tokyo American Club on the very important subject of employee engagement.
Yeah, so following that I did a bit of research, and I want to explore a little bit of what you talked about and a bit more. Off the Gallup survey, which was conducted last year of employee satisfaction worldwide, that revealed that overall there were, I suppose, 7% of Japanese workers who were happy, engaged and engaged in their work. Did that figure surprise you?
Well, there's the Gallup poll that I was referring to.
Yes.
Is actually 2009. They did one in 2007, then they did another one in 2009 for Japan. I don't think they've done one since.
Okay.
And we did our own research in 2012-13. So in 2007, it showed 9% of the Japanese were engaged. In 2009, it showed 7% were engaged.
Right.
And that was, as I said, around mid-year 2009. So the Lehman shock was sort of September 15th, 2008. So it hadn't really come to full force by the time they'd done that survey. So I don't know whether our survey in 2012-13, which only showed 2% engaged, was a consequence of real full power of the Lehman shock, the triple whammy of radiation, earthquake, and tsunami, and the effect that had on the economy, and also just the change around people's thinking about lifetime employment and surety of employee has changed quite a bit. So I don't know, and whether it's 2% or 7%, it's not a great percentage anyway.
No.
So was I surprised? The 2% surprised me,
Right.
to be honest. The 7% when I saw it, because I looked at these polls in the past, and having worked in a number of companies where they've done engagement surveys, and then you see your Japan team survey results come back compared to everyone else in the rest of the region, particularly APAC or globally, and Japan's always the outlier. Always the outlier. There's a couple of factors. One, I think, is cultural around Japanese don't tend to be going high on scoring. They tend to be very conservative. So
Right.
if you give them a choice between 1 and 5, which part of the middle of 3 can I plant myself? Is sort of the idea, right? In fact, I was just doing some executive coaching yesterday for a gentleman for a technology company. He'd just done a 360, and he had his Japanese colleagues scoring him, and it was 3, 3, 3. It was just typical,
Right.
So you've got to look for the microscopic variations amongst the 3 point
Right.
something to try and elucidate something relevant from the scoring. So I think there is a cultural element there, which made it low. But also I think generally it could be that I think, Japan is changing. I think people are becoming a little bit more demanding around their employer. I think that the younger generation particularly, their thoughts on what constitutes employment and the benefits of that to them are quite different. The sort of self-sacrifice element is not there. It's more, what's in it for me is stronger than perhaps in previous generations. Maybe not as much as in the West, but certainly compared to previous generations, there is that element of I really want to know what you're going to do for me. How is this going to help me in my development? How am I going to be treated? Am I being respected? Am I being appreciated enough? Am I being valued enough? And I want that communication. I want to hear it.
Are you inferring then, therefore, for previous generations, if similar surveys had been done, those numbers would have been higher in Japan?
No, I don't think so, particularly. I think probably would have been, if anything, worse. Because I think the sort of management mentality was very top-down, dictatorial, barking out orders, snapping to attention or else type of thing. So, one of the difficulties when you start doing things like engagement in Asia is in a lot of Asian countries there's no such word as engagement. Like there's no kanji in Chinese, there's no hanzi in Chinese or kanji in Japanese for the word engagement, or Korean for that matter. It always becomes a phonetic exercise. Engagemento, what the hell does that mean, So the concepts are a little bit different. I mean, I say it to you in English, you get it immediately. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We have trouble translating it. But I think if I go back to your point about previously, I think it was a much more harsh and brutal management system before because, you think about it. As I mentioned, people came out of the war in every country around the world into leadership positions because they'd been the officer corps, either promoted in the field or had gone through officer school of some type. And so they were naturally the people who were chosen to lead because they had leadership experience. But their leadership model was very much military, very much hierarchy. And I don't think there's too many more brutal regimes around military leadership than the Japanese Imperial Army, or all of the imperial forces, not just the army, but all of them. So you had a pretty harsh model to begin with. And I think in the West, we probably dropped that in the 60s, with the Vietnam War particularly. It sort of brought a lot of that into question. And I think people moved on from that and they started to investigate how can we get people motivated and energetic and enthused and moving forward without having this harsh military style model. How can we actually find the full potential of what they have inside them rather than trying to get just compliance through fear. And so Japan, I don't think, has quite made that break yet. I think they're still locked up into an old model. But it is changing. It is changing. But it's changing perhaps more slowly, and it's sort of still way behind, I think, compared to a Western model.
Well, I suppose you've touched on there China and Korea. I wonder to what degree, looking at the numbers as well, the Gallup poll for China, which were also extremely low, those kind of East Asian Confucian ideals of maybe humility, deference to seniority, those kind of things play into this kind of survey. How much do they affect, do you think?
Well, I don't actually, to be honest, I haven't looked at the surveys for China, so I can't actually speak with any authority about that. And I think China's rather complex employment situation, just the nature of the stage of the economy, moving out of communism. There's state-owned enterprises. There's a lot of things going on there make I think it hard to compare anyway. But coming back to your central point about Confucianism, I think there is that respect for age, respect for seniority, respect for authority. Know your place. Don't step out of line. Safety in the middle of the herd. There's all of those things which I think culturally are right through Asia, that's true. So yes, I think we do get a difference culturally when we do these surveys. Having said that though, I think what you tend to get as a consequence of that is a lack of innovation. You get more compliance, but you don't get the innovation. For example, my favourite reference point is, you've probably seen this yourself, it's a bitterly cold winter's day and it's sort of sleet coming down and you come out of your subway exit and there's this poor person standing there with an umbrella handing out tissue packs. And they hand out all of the tissue packs, I'm from Australia, right? If it was Australia, those tissue packs would be in the dumpster somewhere and they'd be down the pub where it's nice and warm, But Japan, they're diligent, They are diligent and sincere and they do what they're supposed to do. Great. So at a certain level of service you get, a consistent level of attention to detail, which is good. What you don't get is that little bit of innovation, that little bit of pizzazz that doesn't come across. You think about all of the occasions you go to have a meal here, and you probably, in your case, I don't know whether you eat outside or not, but if you go to coffee shops, restaurants, you'll get a level of very common practice, polite service. But you won't get much engagement. You won't get the waitress or the waiter engaging you. Now, if you go to Australia, for example, you have a cup of coffee, they chat with you, they engage with you, It's more than just service, it's a little bit of human interaction to make it a bit more personal. Japan, it's polite but impersonal. Unless you're paying a truckload of money you know, and you've got you know, some sort of relationship with a very high-end restaurant, you know, that type of thing. It's different here. It's sort of polite but impersonal. I think in Australia it can be impolite and sometimes polite and personal. You know, it can,
Right.
There's a more variety there, I think, if I compare that country. In America's a bit different because everyone's looking at their tip. So, you know, it's sort of fake politeness and fake your personal interest, you know.
Right.
Can't believe it's hard to often feel this is genuine, you know, and that's the way it comes across. Maybe they are, but it's hard to feel that. So I think Japan does have that Confucian element. But generally speaking, I think what we're looking for is something beyond compliance. We're looking for something that, example I gave, that yes, people have their hard skill requirements. You've got to know your job. The attitude, yes, the attitude is important. But the attitude is not just partial engagement. I turn up and do my job and get paid and go home. Or I have that sort of base level of politeness and that's enough. We're looking for more than that. We're looking for that, what we call discretionary effort, that amount of effort I'm not required to make, but I make it beyond what I'm required. I take that little bit of extra. I think about it a little bit more. I show I care because I care more, you know, and to communicate that. And so that discretionary effort is the seed bed for getting innovation. Because, you know, if you don't care, why would you worry about making it better? You know, if you're not really emotionally involved in the process, you just do. This is my world. This is very typical in Japan. This is my world, and I'll work within my world. But don't come and ask me for anything outside my world because I'm not ready to do that. I'm not wanting to do that. And that's not my job.
So what is it that motivates Japanese workers then?
Well, I think it's that sort of base loyalty in the culture. I think that there's also, depending who you're talking about. I mean, when we talk about lifetime employment only ever applied to the upper echelon of very large companies. If you're in a middle or a small sized enterprise, you didn't have lifetime employment. So in a way, we've sort of gotten ourselves tied up with lifetime employment. I worked for 4 years in Osaka when I was living in Kobe, and 90% of the companies in the Kansai are small, medium enterprises, you know. So doubtless you could say, well, 90% of the people down there are not enjoying necessarily guaranteed lifetime employment. So who are we really talking about here? When we talk about lifetime employment, it's a small, relatively, population-wise, a smaller group. Having said that, though, I think that there is also, in some companies, some degree of paternalism too in those smaller companies, which again has a sort of reciprocal loyalty, which I think works. And you probably think back, you know, go back to England, you know, where you had this sort of paternal owner of the business, and, you know, the employees were felt, you know, part of the family, and, you know, it wasn't very rational and efficient, but everyone sort of liked it, you know. And then we sort of, inverted commas, moved on, and now it's incredibly brutal and efficient, you know. No more paternal loyalty or reciprocal loyalty. It's a sort of free agent. You know, I mean, that's not necessarily a play that I agree with either, you know. I think that there is a big benefit to having that personalisation of things between the sort of reciprocation of loyalty. So I think in some parts Japan has got some good things there. But I think the problem is, though, you're just not getting enough out of that system anymore. Where you had everyone marching in lockstep, that was fine. But, you know, if you've got the Koreans eating your lunch with a lot of electronic devices these days, you know, Samsung's just killing them, right? The Chinese are making anything you want cheaper. And, you know, we've suddenly got the Japanese charter flights en masse to Myanmar, because Myanmar is going to do it even cheaper than the Chinese, you know, type of thing. So your ability in Japan to manufacture has really got to be in the high value-add areas, because you just can't compete anymore. So if you're going to be in those high value-add areas, that's all going to come out of the brain. That's not going to come out of the brawn, because the brawn can be bought much cheaper somewhere else.
Right.
So if it's going to come out of the brain, then you've got to get people interested in being brainy about things, you know, and being innovative about things, and thinking about the company and how, you know, it can be more competitive, how it can have greater differentiation, better client service or customer service or whatever it might be. You've got to get people's minds around that, as opposed to it's no longer this is just my job. Well, actually, this business is our business, and I've got an incredibly important role here in making sure that I do what I do, but I've also got my thought about the entire picture.
Right.
Now, getting Japanese to think like that is not so easy, I think, because they've been trained to think in very micro terms.
So I wonder then how much of a hurdle it is to change that system, particularly because what you're talking about, maybe the approach and the way of thinking and problem solving, is something which is arguably ingrained from school.
Yeah.
That is a long process, and that's a long, I don't want to say brainwashing, but it's certainly of applying people to a particular kind of system.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I noticed with my son, he's graduated from Japanese primary school. Now he's in international school. And I remember when he was in Japanese primary school, he made a really big effort to fit in and to not stick out, not stand out. And I saw that transition because he'd come out of international school into Japanese primary school, so I could see the change. And I thought, okay, I can see where this starts. But I think the real trigger for change is middle management, because if you think about it, middle management absorb direction from above, the why of what we're doing here. Their job is to build people and manage processes. Most of them, though, think their job is to manage processes. Right? So they are locked into a way of managing flow, avoiding mistakes, making deadlines, timelines, that type of thing. What they haven't quite grasped is that they are also a key communicator of the why, and often they're not a communicator of that why. The why sort of stops with them, and those below only get told the what and possibly the how.
Right.
And that's it. So if you're at the bottom, it's a bit like, well, I'm not quite sure why this task is relevant. I don't see why my input in this project has value. And I think there's a huge opportunity to communicate that. So, if you're at the bottom and you get your little engagement survey, through the email, and you're on this URL somewhere pumping in some answers, and you're detached from the major point of the whole exercise because you've never gotten the why, well, maybe you're going to have some answers that reflect that in how you answer, you see. So I think middle management have got it's like it's not easy in the sense of, we can just flick a switch here, but relatively, if you can get the middle management to be doing a proper job of building people and managing processes, you can get a big change in the engagement score and the engagement outcomes very quickly, because once you communicate to people that why, and also once you engage the people in how we're going to do it, as opposed to do what I tell you to do. Dale Carnegie had a great saying, people own the world that they help to create. Now, in a lot of Japanese individuals' cases, they're getting received worlds from their superiors. They're not getting any input into creating it. So, very typically, if you ask people for an idea, okay, so they give them an idea, and then the boss, the middle manager says, well, that's a stupid idea, or that's never going to work, or we tried that, or that's ridiculous, right? You're only going to do that once, you just cancel their ticket for life on putting out ideas. And I think people's tickets in Japan have pretty much been cancelled through that experience. And also, the ticket's been cancelled through making mistakes too, because mistakes are viewed very negatively here. They don't necessarily see mistakes in a positive sense. Now, you might be thinking, well, how would you see a mistake in a positive sense? But if you think about it, you and I today, we are the product of our experiences built on our mistakes. Everything we've learned through mistakes, basically. And as long as the mistakes are handled the right way and are not allowed to grow into a disastrous proportion, they can be an important part of the learning process. So again, if your middle management is managing properly, for example, if they're delegating in a way that they're not abandoning. Now, often you get delegation, which is, okay, Nick, here's the project, get on with it. That's it. as opposed to explaining why this is important, looking at how we might approach it, getting your ideas, make sure we're on the same track, because I might think that you've taken the same view as I would on how this project should go. So it goes from A to B in a straight line. But, mysteriously you decide to zig or zag to the left or right and you take it to a 45-degree angle somewhere else. Now, if I don't check back with you, at the end of the project, I go, Nick, you've taken this entirely the wrong. This is not what I asked for, Nick. What were you thinking? Now I start to berate you. When really it's my fault, because I should have come back and checked very early. Well, how's it going, Nick? And I realised, no, Nick, you're zagging. We've got to come back here to the middle, zig over here and get back on track, because this is where I needed to go. And get that self-correction going for you, so you've got a clear picture of where you're going. So if that's happening, the mistakes will be small, but they'll be learning experiences, and it's controllable. And I'm not whacking you for making a big mistake.
Right.
So your motivation is still high. You feel you've got control of the project, so your engagement feeling is there. You own that world you're creating. Your opinion on how we could do it is being valued. And again, you feel, yes, I've got some ownership, I've got some skin in the game here. It's not just being told what to do, I actually got command of this. So those things change your engagement outlook. And so when you get the survey and you've got that experience, we're going to answer those questions entirely differently. But it's middle management who are really controlling that through their ability to communicate with people about what's required and how to get them enthused about doing it, and also to get them to be involved, to encourage them to have ideas and to feed into the process. So it's quite doable, but you've really got to change the education for your middle management. And this is, I think, the problem with Japan is that the on-the-job training, the famous or infamous OJT, is a toxic cocktail here, because what you've got is a sort of generation upon generation reproduction of worst practices, not best practices. Because if you trace it back through the hierarchy and the heredity line there, you're going back to the military model through the high growth of the 60s, shocks, oil shocks in the 70s, recessions, IT revolution. You just trace that line right through. There hasn't been a lot of intervention there around teaching middle management how to be really effective middle managers, actually. Management of process, yes, but not building people in the modern way as opposed to the sort of whip way, And I mean, a great example is sports. I mean, you will recall that you had elite athletes, Olympic, national level athletes being physically beaten by their trainers, by their coaches. Unthinkable in any modern culture. And in my own experience, I've seen it too. I've been doing karate now for 43 years. I started a bit of a gasp when I think, how old does that make me? Old, anyway. 43 years. And I go back and I look at how we were taught karate by our Japanese teachers. And it was brutal. It was brutal. It was a very brutal way of being taught. And Australia got creamed in Olympics in, I think it was, now I'm going to say Toronto, but I might have that wrong. It's... was it
Montreal?
Montreal, yes, Montreal.
76.
Yes, 76. We got creamed. And the Australian government, because we're such a sporting-oriented nation, we take this sort of stuff pretty seriously, like a national day of shame. Everyone, black armband day for Australia. So they pump a lot of money into sports because they couldn't have that, right? And one of the things they did was they looked at how sports were being coached. And they looked at who was doing the coaching. They found that in a lot of occasions, the coaching levels weren't very good. So they put a lot of effort, and they started to create a coaching accreditation scheme for all sports. So it didn't matter whether you're a dad coaching the under-8 soccer, or someone like me teaching a karate class, doesn't matter. Every single coach in the whole country had to go and get accredited. Everybody. You had to go to school. You had to go to the colleges, and you go through a course, and you pass the course, and there were levels of this stuff. So we all, turn up, all these, sports coaches turn up to this stuff. What a revelation. What a revelation. Because for the first time, at least in our karate world, we were confronted with Olympic-style coaching, which wasn't being berated. It wasn't being criticised to decalcify your spine type of thing, It was things like, say, for example, say you're doing a particular punch, Nick, in the Japanese model, that's too slow, that's too weak, that's ridiculous. Faster, harder, stronger, do it again. Oh, that's still no good. Instead you do the technique, and it'd be, Nick, that was very good, the way you got the hip action working there. Now, if we can get you to bend your front knee a little bit, I can see how we can get a little bit more length on that punch. If we do that, it means you can stand a little bit further back from your opponent, out of their range, but you can get them with your range because you've got that extra distance now. Just bend that front knee. Let's try it again. Oh, yes, that's much better now. That's good. How does that feel? Let's keep working on that, because do you feel the difference? Yeah, you do. It's an entirely different conversation around what's good, how do we make it better? Now, that good, better concept is a pretty basic concept, but it's probably a fairly new concept of middle management in Japan.
Right.
So we're talking something that basic. And I see it still in sports, and you see it, how sports are being taught. I mean, a lot of Japanese, when we had that case of the basketball suicide, a lot of people said to me, oh, well, that's how I experienced it at high school, and that's just how it is, No, that's not how it is. That is extreme. That someone would kill themselves because they're not wanting to get another 40 slaps in the face from their basketball coach at school,
Right, yeah.
Not normal. And so if you sort of look at all of those sort of cultural elements around how people are coached and their experiences of coaching, how people are taught on-the-job training to be leaders and managers of people, there's a vast gap still, I think, around the educational piece there of what's possible. And I know myself, I was probably, a dreadful karate teacher because I was extremely young and I was gung-ho and I was absorbing this sort of model from the Japanese, so you're sort of very harsh with people. And I think back now and I'm sort of, my God, I'm aghast. I must have been a handful in those days, and I think, but we changed, you can change. And I think and we know this from our own training, as we teach people and we make them aware of this and we teach them how to model this and we give them practice on doing it, they start to get it. They realise, you know what, I don't have to do it the old way. I can actually encourage people. I can actually absorb the idea of people's ideas and input those into the process. And I don't have to be the font of all wisdom. I can be the builder of people and a manager of processes. So it's doable, and it's not a cultural construct that's impossible here. It's within the culture it can be done.
I wonder, though, to what... I can see the possible resistance from, let's say, Japanese middle management or senior management for the fact they might say, well, it got us to this point already. We remain the third largest economy in the world.
You paused there, Nick. Starting to wonder if that's stick to number 4.
2 or 3.
Where are they again? Are they down to number 4 already?
But if we compare, go back to the Gallup numbers, which I was reading about some other nations that came top. And the Japanese might well look at those as well. And they go, okay, so Brazil ended up with a number that was 27% of people happy, and they're having problems preparing for a World Cup in 3 months. Panama ended up top at 37. And we're here, and it works. So why should we? They turn around and go, it might, because it's obviously maybe not working there. You have engaged, happy workers, but something's not obviously converting into success, business success. But we have unhappy workers, and we've converted it into global success.
Well, I don't know that too many Japanese people are all that confident about Japan's future. If it's working so well, you'd expect we're going to be confident about the future, but they're not, because they know it's not working well. They know that the model that they had, where you had MITI in those days became METI,
Right.
Ministry of Industry, Trade, etc., pumping money into designated target industries and vanquishing companies and industries that weren't competitive, and providing subsidies and providing export funding very cheaply, and bringing to bear the sort of political, economic, governmental worlds for Japan's benefit, and having high tariff walls and having exclusionary policies around regulatory barriers to make sure that Japan was well and truly protected, but they could plunder the rest of the world at will.
Right.
Perfect system, right? Nothing wrong with this picture if you're Japanese, but that's not the world as it is anymore.
No.
And they can't get into TTP because they're not going to relent on 215% tariff on rice or whatever it is.
Right.
Excuse me. So they know the world's not working as it was. They know that they have to change. They know that they're under the gun. They know that. I mean, the whole country knows that. So I think it's not a fact of it ain't broke, so we don't have to fix it. It's broken.